Hi y'all, Cloudstone Curious here talking about brewing budget decks. I design fun commander decks that play well and, hopefully, win at the $100 price range, excluding the price of the commander and basics. Prices are based on TCG player mid at the time of the deck's creation. The link to the full deck list can be found in the description below. I'm still relatively new to content creation, so any thoughts and feedback you may have will be greatly appreciated. If you want to watch more content like this, help me grow my channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Let's get to it. Today we're brewing Purphoros Bronze Blooded is 4 generic and 1 red to cast, a legendary enchantment creature, god, and much like the other Theros gods, Purphoros is indestructible, and it has the line of text as long as your devotion to red is less than 5, Purphoros isn't a creature. Other creatures you control have haste, and for 2 generic and 1 red, you may put a red creature card or an artifact creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So this card is actually inspired by another card called Sneak Attack. However, one notable difference that you'll see is that Sneak Attack can give you or can allow you to put in any creature, not necessarily a red creature or an artifact creature, any creature from your hand onto the battlefield. So you can sneak attack in an Eldrazi, but I suppose to, in a way, nerf Purphoros, they didn't want to let you do that. Aside from giving you the option of doing that, I suppose if you have a Painter's Servant or something like that. But largely, Purphoros deals with red creatures and artifact creatures. So, what is the strategy going in? Well, very simply, the strategies going in will be to beat face. We will be putting into play very efficient, or not really mana efficient, but putting into play very efficiently huge creatures that have either enters the battlefield or die effects and can swing because they do have haste from Purphoros, giving it as an ability, as a passive ability. So huge creatures, creatures that can maximize damage, creatures that have evasion, and creatures that will just do other things when they attack, die, or enter the battlefield. Barring just straight up combat, you have other ways as well, such as Pandemonium, which is an enchantment for 3 generic and 1 red. Whenever a creature comes into play, that creature's controller may have it deal damage equal to its power to target creature or player of his or her choice. So take note, at least in the errated version, you can also target planeswalkers with this card. So it's to any target instead of target creature or player. Now also take note that this is symmetrical. So if you're playing an opponent that casts Eldrazi or other big creatures, then this might hit you as well. So be mindful of that happening. And I'll talk about how to play this deck in a bit. But the idea here is that if you're locked in combat, if for example you can't swing in, for whatever reason, you can still get some residual damage in due to Pandemonium. And of course, you can also use other means like Luca Coppercoat Outcast. If you can get Luca all the way up to 7 and down tick it by 7, then all of your creatures will deal damage equal to their power to each opponent. So another way to win, a bit of a long shot, but if you can manage it, then points for style, I suppose. Okay, so what is the strategy going in? So first off, ramp as fast as you can, but no more than you should. This deck will rarely need more than 10 mana available during the turn. And that's being generous. That's only if you want to cast some other things. But for the most part, you'll be using Purphoros to bring stuff in, swing, and then let the stuff die. It's very, I wouldn't say it's very glass cannon in that style, but it is very impulsive. So it's very red. Uh, you don't want to overextend your ramp because you also need to worry about grip management. It's similar to watching a blue player untap have a full grip of cards in their hand and then leave all their mana open. It's the same idea because Purphoros can activate at instant speed. You want to keep your opponents thinking. In fact, another strategy is to activate Purphoros at end of turn. Once all of the triggers have been, or anything that would have triggered by then, activate it at end of turn of your opponent. Put in some of your creatures, and they won't go away until the end of your turn, which is, for us old-timey folks who've been playing this game, it's called the Waylay abuse. But Waylay, the card has been errataed, so I don't know how accurate that term is anymore. Anyway, so grip management, you want to maintain, if not the image of the actual threat, the image of a threat at the very least. But also you do want to keep threats in your hand. You want to not overextend. So while red is impulsive in that it can throw away resources, it doesn't waste resources. So keep that in mind when you're playing the deck. Always threat assessment with this commander. That's a bit of a mouthful. But with this commander, and actually with any red deck, you constantly have to be looking at your threats. Red doesn't do removal all that well in commander compared to, I suppose, other colors that have more flexibility. Red is about damage and maybe breaking artifacts. But other than that, there are not a lot of options. So you survey the field, look at or look for the player that will most likely be a threat to you, and take that player out. Usually, red has a hard time catching up with life gain. So I tend to take out the life gain player first, and then anyone that runs primarily enchantments. Planeswalkers, I'm not too worried about. I'm not too worried about Super Friends because there are lots of ways to deal damage in this deck. Token builds, token strategies, I run a few board wipes, and you'll see in a bit why that's not that scary. But anything with life gain, anything that's enchantment dependent, that will be a challenge for you. So take them out before they can set up. Don't be afraid to kill a few dorks, to kill a few mana dorks. Break a few artifacts if you need to, just to delay them so that you can get set up, so that you can be the threat to them before they can even respond. And since you're proactive, you will tend to be the biggest threat, or at least you will be perceived as the archenemy on the table, the biggest threat on the table, because you're just dealing 26 damage in a turn and passing as if nothing happened. So watch your 6. Make sure that you're able to defend yourself. Make sure that your life total is something that you can maintain. You don't want to die all of a sudden, particularly on the crackback, which has happened to me a lot of times, especially if I focus in on a player that's being a threat to the board. But make sure that you're also delaying your opponent so that they can't crack back at you, or play a little politics, as always. Like, I'm going to take this one player out, but y'all can't attack me for one turn, so I can defend myself. Or I'm not going to board wipe, I'll take this one player out, but you need to defend me. Or you need to avoid attacking me at the very least. So a little bit of politicking will go a long way. And finally, even a sledgehammer requires skill. So yes, Purphoros is a sledgehammer, has a sledgehammer, as you can see there. But it's not about just looking for the biggest card in your hand, the biggest creature in hand, and attacking with it. You have to plan, you have to pick your spots, basically. There is a small recursion package in the deck, so you can also play that, play around that strategy, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But largely, while you do want to be attacking with your creatures, you don't want to just use them inefficiently. Um, you don't want to miss the opportunity and give your opponents a time to respond or a chance to respond on their turn. Let's say you hit them with 32 on an attack when waiting could have you could have hit them with 40. Then it's all about picking those spots. It's all about identifying when you're supposed to be the threat. Okay, so let's look at the cards that comprise the deck. First off, Mana Ramp. So the mana package for this deck is fairly straightforward. For red, you have your usual mana dorks, Soulbright Flamekin, which I'll explain in a bit. Ironcrag Ironcrag Feet rather. Ironcrag Feet here uh, is good because it does generate you a lot of mana for the turn. It's 4 to cast, generates you a lot of, I think generates you 7 mana. So if you're playing this on turn 5 or on a turn where you have 5 mana, you can actually cast Ironcrag Feet, cast Purphoros, and then activate Purphoros because that's not counting. That doesn't count towards your spell limit because that's what Ironcrag Feet does. It adds 7, and then you can only cast 1 spell per turn, or 1 spell for that turn rather. Activate Purphoros, get a creature in, get a nice swing, and then pass the turn. So Soulbright Flamekin again. Soulbright Flamekin, uh, one generic and one red elemental shaman. It's a 2/1, and it has pay 2. Target creature gains trample until end of turn. If this is the third time this ability has resolved this turn, you may add 8 red mana to your mana pool. So this gets crazy because you need 6 mana and it generates 8 red. Now the deck runs quite a few colorless mana sources. So having as many red mana or as much red mana as you can get really helps Purphoros activate. And the thing about this is you can actually just target Soulbright Flamekin itself and it will give it trample. You don't need to attack with it, you just need the mana. So it does generate mana. So I added it here. It does generate mana if you already have the existing mana, kind of like Castle Garenbrig or something like that. Tran Turbine is also here because it adds the mana on your upkeep, at which point you can activate Purphoros. It adds 2 colorless mana. Then just pay a red and you can activate Purphoros. It's an extra, a little bit extra value for your deck. Another thing that I added here that I count as ramp in terms of letting you put stuff into play faster, giving you more resources, is Fires of Invention. So Fires of Invention is three generic and 1 red, an enchantment. You can cast spells only during your turn, and you can cast no more than 2 spells each turn. And you may cast spells with converted mana cost or mana value less than or equal to the number of lands you control without paying their mana cost. So, if you have this in play, you can actually, and you have enough lands, you can cast some of the creatures if you're not worried about counter magic. You can cast them and then you don't need to sacrifice them after or at the end of your turn. Of course, they still get the haste, they still get the benefit. So this is one of the ways that you can generate more value. Uh, the downside, of course, is you can only cast 2 of these spells, but again, with Purphoros out, you don't actually need to cast that many spells because you can just activate Purphoros and bring the creature into play. One thing that does suck though is that it shuts off your spells on your opponent's turn, so there won't be a whole lot of instants in this deck. Um, the worst part, I guess, that happens sometimes is you can't Chaos Warp something that is about to go off, a Planeswalker that's about to go off. Can't do anything. So that's why I said threat assessment, threat assessment, threat assessment. Very important. Okay, let's move on. So that is the ramp package. Let's move on to card draw. So managing your hand is very important It's not necessarily about card advantage. Sometimes it's just about card selection, knowing which cards to keep in your hand, or having access to more spells that you can cast. So for this, we actually have a lot. We have a lot of abilities or a lot of cards that give you, if not straight up card advantage, or card draw, some card advantage, card selection. So Magus the Wheel, Runehorn Hellkite, Dragon Mage, these all wheel you, meaning they let you discard your hand and draw 7 cards. Sandstone Oracle is good if you have an opponent that is really building up their hand. You can match that, or if you're just running out of cards in hand, put it into play. You get a flyer, and you also get to draw some cards. The Reti, it serves a double purpose in this deck, and I'll explain that in a bit. But there's a recursion package within the Reti, and there's also a draw or card advantage package or function to the Reti. Luca, aside from the ultimate, its +1 will allow you to exile cards from your library and play creatures that are exiled with Luca. So some sort of card advantage. Of course, you can't activate Purphoros to put those creatures into play, but if you're at that point where you're able to cast a 5-mana Planeswalker, you can probably cast some other creatures. Faithless Looting, usual Magmatic Insight, Thrill of Possibility, all of these other things. Seize the Spoils is a relatively new card. It's 3 mana, additional cost, discard a card, draw 2 cards, and create a treasure token. So the treasure token really was the thing that pushed the spell. It's not a really good ratio in terms of mana versus draw, but getting that treasure back for the next turn, it's a temporary ramp. It's a temporary ramp so that you have a better chance of casting Purphoros when you need to cast it. Skullclamp is really good in this deck because once the creature comes into play and you have the mana, clamp the creature because it will definitely die at end of turn, and you get 2 cards from the ability. Endless Atlas, basically not an auto-include, but strong contender for that term for any monocolor deck, and Jar of Eyeballs. I'll explain that in a bit. But before that, let's go to the Reti. So the Reti's +2 here is that you discard up to 2 cards and then draw that many cards. That's good because you can put some of the cards that you want to recur in the graveyard. And you'll see what I'm talking about later. But if you have something like a Phyrexian Triniform or an Ancient Stone Idol, you can discard that, uptick the Reti, and then get 2 more cards. Now, there are a lot of mana rocks and artifact dorks in the deck. So next turn, you can downtick the Reti by 2, and then put your huge creature into play. You lose a dork, you lose a mana rock, but hey, you have a creature that will stick around. So that's very good. Can't be the target for Go for the Throat, which is a very common removal spell. Can't be, doesn't usually get affected by something like anything that gives, like I suppose if you're committed enough, Toxic Deluge, sure, but still a very good play if you can manage it. Okay, and the other one that I mentioned is Jar of Eyeballs. Now, I ran into this and I found it very interesting because here's what it's gonna do. For 3 colorless, whenever a creature you control dies, put 2 eyeball counters on Jar of Eyeballs. So, a creature will almost always die on your turn, sometimes on your opponent's turn, if you're activating Purphoros on your opponent's turn to, let's say, block something or get an effect. So Jar of Eyeballs, really, really good in that sense because it will always have two eyeball counters on it. And then you pay the 3 and you tap it. You remove the 2 eyeball counters, and you can look at the top 2 cards. And you can draw, or you can put into hand one of them. So this is good because in red, you do need the draw. You do need some sort of filtering. This is basically like scry 2 and draw 1 in a way. Well, not exactly, but it's almost like that. And if you can do that every turn, you'll be accruing value, selecting the cards that you actually need. And it's a niche card. It's nice. I like playing with cards like these that make opponents go, wait, what? What does that do? That's I've never seen that before. So it's a nice effect. You don't really want to overload the jar of eyeballs because um, digging deep isn't as valuable as digging often. I think for this deck, there are a lot of creatures in this deck. There's like 31 creatures. About 7 or 8 of those are utility creatures. Everyone else, they're bombs. They're strong. So you can keep digging. You have a better chance of drawing into a threat if you use Jar of Eyeballs frequently. But let's proceed to the next section. Targeted removal. Now, as I mentioned, red struggles with this, but I do have some cards that I would consider targeted removal. So let's look at the following. Inferno Titan, when it enters the battlefield or attacks, it deals 3 damage divided any which way among any number of targets. If you want to blast something out, you can do that. If you want to, I call it targeted removal because it's an option, and it's probably how I will most likely use it. I probably won't be pointing the 3 at my opponent unless my opponent's like below 20 and I'm just trying to close the game. But otherwise, I'll be removing something on the board. Same thing with Dracoseth. Meteor Golem, 7 to cast, artifact creature, 3/3. Enters the battlefield, destroy target non-land permanent you don't control. So this will take care of enchantments to a certain extent. It's not great, but it'll do. And you have everything else there. Bogardan Hellkite is really good for the same reason Inferno Titan is good. You can actually just remove a creature, or functionality wise, if you're trying to close the game, imagine you have a Pandemonium and then a Bogardan Hellkite, you activate it, it deals 5 from the Pandemonium, deals 5 from the Bogardan, enter the battlefield ability, and then when it swings, it deals another 5. So it's a good closer. Tyrant's Familiar also can take out creatures. I've used Tyrant's Familiar to take out commanders. The additional 7 mana is really good. Oh, sorry, 7 damage rather is really good. And another card that doesn't see a lot of play, Shenanigans. So you can destroy creatures, you can destroy planeswalkers with the damage, but artifacts are a bit harder to take care of. So something like Shenanigans will help. Because it's for 1 colorless or 1 generic and 1 red. Sorcery, destroy target artifact, and you can dredge. So it's a red dredge card. As far as I know, the only red dredge card there is. And you can recur it, you can use it again and again. Keep those mana rocks at bay if you have opponents who are, I don't know, you're running Panharmonicon or anything like that. Vidalcan Orrery, you can definitely use Shenanigans on that. And then if it gets countered, just dredge it away and do the thing all over again. For cards, for colors like red or green, if I can't stop the counter magic, I will just walk into it. Like exhaust your resources on me. I trust that I can outpace you because I'm not the only opponent that you have. Whereas the control player has to be worried about everyone else. All right. So that is your targeted removal package. Let's go on to board wipes. Board wipe. The debate on board wipe is funny, but in this case, you don't need to really worry about huge creatures because you have the targeted removal. Indestructible, sure, but like there's only so much you can do in red. That's consistent. So board wipe here in this case tackles a number of permanents, and uses destroy. So not necessarily exile, but destroy. Let's look at some of the samples here. So Ryusei the Falling Star is a dragon from Kamigawa. When it dies, it deals 5 damage to each creature. I think each creature without flying or each creature, I'm not so sure. But it does wipe the board. Bloodfire Colossus is also good. You put it into play, you swing with it. On your second main phase, you act, or during combat, once you've dealt damage, you activate it and sacrifice, and it deals 6 more damage to everyone, including yourself and your creatures, and everyone's creatures. So 6 damage, board wipe. Pretty good. Also a closer. You tend to be on the throne or have the highest life total unless everyone's like ganging up on you. So these symmetrical damage effects are actually pretty decent because you're dealing more damage than everyone else. And on that note, another card that I recently discovered from a YouTube channel called EDH Deck Builder is Rupture. So for 2 generic and 1 red sorcery, sacrifice a creature. Let me get the oracle text. Rupture, sacrifice a creature. Rupture deals damage equal to that creature's power to each creature without flying and each player. Take note that it is not an additional cost. Meaning, if Rupture gets countered, you don't need to sacrifice anything. It's part of the effect. Anyway, hopefully it doesn't get countered because when you sacrifice a creature that was going to die anyway, it deals damage equal to that creature's power to each creature without flying and each player. So it's basically Chandra's Ignition. That's 3 mana. Sure, it doesn't hit flyers, and sure, it hits you with the damage as well, yes, but again, as I said, if you're playing this deck right, you're usually on the throne. You're the one dealing damage. So this is a good closer. Imagine swinging with a 12-12 and then casting this. Wipe the board, deal 12 more damage to everyone. Poor guy who got hit by the 12-12 gets dealt another 12. So it's a good effect, I think. Similarly, Blasphemous Act is there. Oblivion Stone and Nev's Disc are there because, again, if you're facing an Enchantress deck, there's really not a whole lot you can do. So I run both effects. There are other effects like Eye of Doom, which is another weird card that you can run, but that requires some politicking. Thing is, if you're on the throne, people will not want to politic with you, or if you're the one who's clearly becoming the arch enemy, they will not want to make deals with you. I didn't include Perilous Vault because that will also exile our commander, so that's no bueno, no good. We can't have our commander going away. Usually, this deck will only cast its commander once, again, because it's indestructible. If it gets bounced, then it gets bounced to your hand, and you don't need to pay the commander tax. Worst thing that happened to me with this commander was it was enchanted with Song of the Dryads, and at that point, like, I can't do anything about this anymore. I don't have enchantment removal. So that sucked. Anyway, let's move on. So as I said, there's a small recursion package. A lot of your creatures will be dying with this deck. So you want to add some value to their death, make their deaths more meaningful by bringing them back, I guess. Alright, so for our recursion package, we have Goblin Welder, Felden of the Third Path, Immortal Phoenix, Mimic Vat, and Godfarer's Gift. So Goblin Welder is a very good card for the example I gave earlier. Let's say you cast it turn 1, and then turn 2 you play an Arcane Signet or something. And then with the Arcane Signet, you cast Faithless Looting. You discard Ancient Stone Idol or something like that. Phyrexian Triniform. You tap your Goblin Welder. You sacrifice the Arcane Signet. And you bring back one of those huge creatures. In fact, Phyrexian Triniform and Goblin Welder work together so well because if on your next turn you swing with the Triniform and it lives, sacrifice it, bring back the Signet, the Arcane Signet, or bring back another creature. But when the Triniform dies, you get 3 artifact creatures, 3 golems. Next turn, just bring back the Triniform by sacrificing a golem, and you just keep gaining value. It's hard to keep up with something like that. Feldon on the third path, also good because it recurs your creature, puts a token copy of it into play, which is also an artifact, which can also be targeted by the Goblin Welder. But crucially, you sacrifice the token at end of combat so that dice effects will still trigger. So that's good. So I talked about Goblin Welder, and here's Feldon of the third path. So for Feldon, well, let's go back a little bit for Goblin Welder. So Goblin Welder is Goblin Artificer, 1 red, and you tap it. And I don't know, the exact wording is, let me get the exact wording. Goblin Artificer. That's a difficult word. Artificer. Goblin Welder. Okay. It's a welder. Okay. Tap, choose target artifact a player controls, and target artifact card in that player's graveyard. If both targets are still legal as this ability resolves, meaning when you activate it, nothing happens to those artifacts. They don't get exiled, or the one artifact doesn't get sacrificed or bounced. If both targets are legal as this ability resolves, that player simultaneously sacrifices the artifact and returns the artifact card to the battlefield. So, you can actually screw someone up by activating Goblin Welder and, let's say, getting their expedition map from their graveyard and putting it into play, and maybe putting a Soul Ring or something else into their graveyard. Depends on your usage. Again, you can use it on yourself, you can use it on other people. And Feldon of the third path is 1 generic, red and red, legendary creature, human artificer. Okay, I'll say artificer. So for 2 generic and 1 red, tap, create a token that's a copy of target creature card in your graveyard, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. So again, Goblin Welder. It gains haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So you can just keep doing this every turn, keep bringing back the creature, swinging with it, and then letting it die. You don't really want to activate Purphoros to bring Feldon down, because Feldon will then die. But for the other stuff, it's almost like you're activating Purphoros for the graveyard, in a way. But then you can do it every turn. So that's a small recursion package. God-Pharaoh's Gift also does the same thing. You can bring back, actually you exile a creature and you bring back a copy of that creature. It's a 4/4. It's also a black zombie. So it has everything else except that it's a 4/4 and a black zombie. And let's go at value cards and finishers. So in terms of value cards and finishers, these are the cards that you really want to be swinging with. Of course, other cards you can be swinging with, they do have extra functions. Like I said, Dracoseth is or could be targeted removal, but it's also really a bomb, right? So a few of the cards here might be questionable. Ancestral Statue, I put it in there just because if I want to recur something that has an ETB, I can activate it, bring back the creature that has ATB, let the Ancestral Statue die, if that matters more to me. Or to save a creature, could be like if I swing in with a Dragon Tyrant and it's targeted with a Swords to Plowshares, I can just activate Purphoros again, drop an Ancestral Statue, remove it from combat, and put it back to hand. So that's an option. So everyone here, Hoarding Dragon gets you an artifact, so the God-Pharaoh statue you can get with Hoarding Dragon or all the other artifacts that you'd like. Etali just lets you play stuff from your opponent's top of library, and so on and so forth. I've already explained some of these cards, you've already seen them. But two of these are actually really good. Flame Rush Rider, when it attacks and it's attacking with another creature, you put a token onto the battlefield tap, attacking. That's a copy of another target attacking creature. So, let's say it's a Dragon Tyrant, and you have a Flame Rush Rider into play. Again, you can activate Purphoros to put this into play, or you can use the dash ability. But if you have the mana and you're not worried about removal, just keep it in play. And then swing with it, and then you create another Dragon Tyrant, which is another 6/6 double strike in the air, and you just deal a whole bunch of damage. Now, the tokens are exiled, they don't get the sacrifice trigger, so Avatar of Slaughter will not get the nice golem triggers, but it's still a good effect. Clone Shell is really good because it lets you look at the top 4 cards of your library. Not 5. Top 4 cards of your library. You exile one face down. And then when it dies, you actually put that creature into play. So, this is one way for you to bring in huge creatures for 3 mana. Put in Clone Shell, pass the turn, Clone Shell dies, and then whatever big creature you had in your exile, if you had got a big creature, will come into your battlefield and will stay. Very importantly, will stay. Mirage Mirror can copy practically anything. Of course, can't copy Planeswalkers, but can copy almost anything. You can copy another Flame Rush Rider and then swing and then make, I suppose, 2 copies of the Dragon Tyrant. I've used the Mirage Mirror to copy a Lathril so that I'll have blockers. Or that so I can have something to clamp onto with my Skull Clamp. So, yeah, lots of different strategies for the bombs. Again, it's a sledgehammer, but a sledgehammer that requires intelligence. Okay, so let's go to the utility lands. So the land package for this, you have these cards, 11 cards that are considered utility. In the first column, Crystal Vein, Dwarven Ruins, Guildless Commons, Mirrored Landscape, Sandstone Needle. These are all just designed to ramp you, to get you to the mana needed to play Purphoros, because you want Purphoros in the field, on the field rather. Dwarven Ruins and Sandstone Needle are temporary. They can give you mana. They can give you 2 mana for a temporary length of time. Crystal Vein can also give you 2 mana temporarily, but again, this deck isn't mana hungry. You can get by with 6 mana, put in 2 creatures at a time, but if you want to develop your board, you're going to want more, but you'll be fine with 6 mana. Other cards, Buried Ruin, the usual suite, Endless Sands. Endless Sands is my only concession to perhaps exiling my creatures so that I can retrieve them on a later turn if I want to. I very rarely do this. I just use it for the mana, but it's an option. Push comes to shove, I'd rather have the option than be super efficient about everything. Gyreach Sanitarium for the draw. Great Furnace just because it makes red and it's an artifact. So same logic with the example earlier with Goblin Welder. You can sacrifice it and bring back a big creature. So aside from those lands, of course, you have 25 mountains in the deck, and that rounds it up to 100 cards. So let's talk now about possible includes for this deck. So a few of the cards that you can use. Malignus can be really good, and I had it before. Imagine swinging for 20, but it doesn't scale. As the turns progress, it gets smaller, and it sucks to draw into a Malignus and you put into play it's a 6/6. It's not great. So I took it out. Cavalier of Flame also was promising, but uh, it's a good attacker, but didn't have any evasion. So that's one. It does allow me to wheel, so I'm not entirely uh, sold on not putting it in. I guess the biggest argument against it is that it's a bit pricey. It's about $3. So it'll take away, or could be more at this point. It'll take away some slots from the other cards. Again, if you're not worried about money, usual cards that go with this is Blightsteel Colossus. Just swing in with an 11/11 infect, uh, and just take someone out real quick, and then shuffle it back in, and hopefully repeat the process. Greater Gargadon is good. I had it before, but it runs into the same problem with Malignus. It's an efficient way to use your creatures because instead of just dying, they get sacrificed, and you down tick your Gargadon, and then it sticks. When it loses all its time counters, it enters the battlefield and it can attack and it doesn't go away. Problem is, a 1/1 can chump block the Greater Gargadon. Let me double check that if Greater Gargadon has any trample. I'm pretty sure it doesn't. Greater Gargadon. Yeah, it doesn't have a trample. So, not great. I mean, it's greater, but like, not a great attacker. It's a good sack outlet, though. Bearer of the Heavens, I ran this card. This is a killer. Like, this will get you hated out of your pod. If you're ready to set up immediately after, what I used to do was, if I had like a couple of lands and a mana rock in my hand on my opponent's turn, at their end of turn, I would activate Purphoros to bring in Bearer of the Heavens. And then I'll swing with the Bearer of the Heavens, hopefully, for 10 damage. If not, I'll just let it die and then blow everything up, except Purphoros, because again, Purphoros is indestructible. I've had this backfire on me because an opponent cast Brought Back, which brought back those creatures that died, or a couple of permanents that died. So it wasn't a total reset for my opponent. I had a few lands and I was able to set up, but I eventually lost that game because everyone just started hating on me after letting Bear of the Heavens die. That's why I took it out. I very rarely want to play it. Terror of the Peaks, it doubles as your Pandemonium for a relatively low cost, but it is $20 at this point, so I didn't include it. Conjurer's Closet, it's good in theory, but I don't know. I tried it. I ran it before. It was never in my hand often enough to really matter. And sometimes when I have it in the hand, I really wish I just had a different creature. I suppose if you have something like Gamble, you can tutor for it. But aside from that, it wasn't doing a lot of work, so I cut it out. Same thing with Dial of the Infinite. I don't think this would matter all that much. So I don't put them in because also I gotta free up some money for the deck itself, for the components. So if you want to build this and want to go beyond the budget, here are some cards that you can consider. Of course, the usual fast mana is also very important because getting Purphoros out is priority. Okay, that was Purphoros Bronze Blooded. This is a really fast deck if you know what you're doing. This can get very threatening. I've been hated out of pods because of this, but it's fun because it's not super linear. It does require a lot of thinking and planning. Not tipping your hand, but it's pretty strong. It's people don't expect you to swing for 32, 36 damage in one turn. So give it a try. Again, the deck list is in the description down below. If you like similar content, please do leave a like, a comment, or subscribe to the channel. Please help me grow my channel. I will be featuring a gameplay video for Purphoros. Uh, I suppose tomorrow I'll post something. But for now, that's it. Again, I hope you like that deck tech. Any feedback would be very helpful. And I hope your day is going well.